Bang. Okay. All right. So Mariana Mazzucato, and I'm going to go until 6, and then we'll be done. I imagine you probably found this a little bit difficult. Yeah, I figured. It's okay. This is the hardest text you're going to have. I promise you that. And I'm going to do my best to try and explain what she's up to here. She is taking on this thing, or she's discussing this thing basically called value theory. Value theory. I'm going to reference a few points she makes in the early part of the text. She talks about, basically her task in this book, she says, is she's going to ask the question, what is value and what does it come from? Okay. Prior in the early part of the 20th century, in early capitalist economics, there was the prejudice that manufacturing and industry, production, that is where value comes from. That is what makes value. That's what makes things of value. And she is worried that that is gone. Okay. She says there has been a swing from value determining price to price determining value. This is a quote on page 7. There's a swing from value determining price. What is the value of a good? How useful is that to me? That determines its price. Now we've entered a realm where price determines value. Or to put it another way, if a CEO has a gigantic salary, that indicates that he must be of value. Okay, there's a presumption. And she finds this definition problematic and superficial. Here's a claim on page 8 I'm going to share with you all. If you have your text handy, she says at the bottom of that middle paragraph, an intellectually impoverished idea of value is taken as read, assumed simply to be true, and the disappearance of the concept of value, this book argues, has paradoxically made it much easier for the crucial term value, a concept that lies at the heart of economic thought, to be used and abused in whatever way one may find useful. It has been abused. The idea of value has been abused, and Olivia is very clever. The idea, because college tuition, that gets wrapped up in this debate of value, and it's a good question whether worrying about the value, the actual value reflected in that tuition. Excellent. About the change between value and price. She notes that historically, something called rents. This is a technical term. I'm not talking about the rent you pay for your apartment, although that is included. We call it rentism, or, what that means is that refers to people who live off of, various investments. The original term is, Marx understood it disdainfully. A rentier, that's a person. A rentier he's basically someone who lives off of his assets without doing any work, right? That could mean a landlord, although in some cases landlords have to do a lot of work to upkeep a place. But it could also mean that you have cash that you passively invest somewhere and hope that it accrues interest, right? Or it accrues profits. She says that historically, rentism was seen as unearned income and that they were not a form of production. But that is switched today, that pretty much the principal industry that today that is at the center of the debate over value is the financial sector, the financial industry, the big banks who create investment products and invest money, right? They are at the center of this debate now because it is not apparent that they create value, although they strenuously argue that they do. Okay. She points out on this is on page 11, government typically, she says government can and should be part of the debate, about this, about its productivity. Traditionally, government should be part of this debate. And she points out her first book, which I think is also very interesting, if any of this interests you. She points out that, listen, the US government in particular spent a lot of money, invested a lot of money developing the internet. And these basic networking infrastructure that now the Silicon Valley firms have taken and run with. The government played a crucial role with these early investments. We're going to read more about that next week. And so there is a good argument for saying that government is productive. How government contribution, however, the prejudice pertains today, as we saw with Milton Friedman, that government is not productive, and government, whatever government does, it should butt out. It's not part of the discussion of productivity. And here's another nice quote on page 11. This is in the middle of the page. She says, as economists and wider society came to determine value by supply and demand, what is bought has value. Activities such as financial transactions were redefined as productive, whereas previously they had been classed as unproductive. Significantly, the only major part of the economy which is now considered largely to lie outside the production boundary remains government, right? Good. But here's the point about the financial industry. It defends its productivity, and yet careful analysis, she's going to argue, points out that it is quite the opposite. It's not neutral. It actually promotes, it is a force of unproductivity in the economy. So that's going to be the gist of her argument going forward. Let me pause for a second, see if anybody has any questions. I didn't mean to just sprint without seeing if anybody wants to ask anything. So feel free. Good. She says that today we are stuck with the subjective theory of value. The subjective theory of value, which means that basically it's the idea that if it's in demand, it has value. If it commands a price, it has value. And she says, really, what value needs is a discussion of whether instead these things are productive. So let me give you an example. According to subjective theory of value, you know what has value? Heroin, because there's a demand. But is it actually productive? That's the question. She's going to ask in a similar vein, there looks to be a demand for financial services, for investment products that are risky and volatile. And yet, are they actually productive, right? So good. I'm going to talk a little bit about chapter 5, the rise of casino capitalism, and I'll see how far I get here. Casino capitalism, that's a nice term. Casino, why that term? What do you think that term means, everybody or anyone? Casino.
Because it's a bunch of risk.
Yeah. It's like gambling, right? A lot of times talk of the stock market sounds like conversations about gambling, or it seems like it, right? The financial industry is the issue, right? They're the ones at the major banks and the various stocks that they funnel our savings into. Early on in chapter 5, she talks about asset management. That has become a major force of these banks. Here's a quote in the middle of 31, at the bottom 135. She says, another significant boost to finance has been the rise of the asset management industry and its different components, from widely marketed retail investment funds to hedge funds and private equity. While average incomes have grown, enabling a buildup of savings, especially by the better off, rising longevity and government's reduced appetite for social insurance and pension provision have put pressure on households around the world to make their savings work harder. Those who manage investments on their behalf can claim a fee. Whether or not their stock picks and strategies have demonstrably added value, taken together with traditional banking and released from the regulations that previously kept financial firms' size and risk appetite in check, those forces caused the sector to grow disproportionately large. The banks are increasingly investing your funds, our funds, in risky ventures. But what I really wanted to talk about, this is the reason I thought this book was important. It's what she says at the bottom of this page on 135. Average incomes have grown, enabling a buildup of savings, rising longevity, and government's reduced appetite for social insurance and pension provision have put pressure on households around the world to make their savings work harder, have pushed people to invest in the stock market and various investment funds. Okay. Longevity. What's that all about? When she uses that term, what's she referring to?
Like being invested long term.
It's not about investment longevity. This has something else.
Having your money, having your money.
How long do you
Living
need your
longer?
money for? Sorry, I spoke over someone.
Living longer?
That's what she's talking about. People, let me paint the picture for you. Back in the 70s, you had an industrial job in a factory, you got a pension and you had Social Security. Those factory jobs are gone. Jobs don't offer pensions anymore. You're on your own. You have Social Security, but that's only a portion, and it depends what your tastes are. How much appetite do you have? Do you want to retire to Florida? Do you need that second car or that second house? The point is that people are being driven. There's a huge appetite for these investment products. People have to invest. People are being driven into the stock market. You, as soon as you graduate school, are going to be driven into the stock market. There is no choice, right? Maybe you've heard of something called a Roth IRA. I'm sorry to introduce this upsetting term to you. You're going to have to think about this in like a year. IRA stands for Individual Retirement Account. You're going to have to start saving money. Here's how it works, y'all. It's you will put your pre-tax income. This is, the government says you can put your pre-tax income, and that's going to be more than your tax income, of course. So this is a government incentive. Think about it. The US government is incentivizing you to buy stock. You take your pre-tax income, you buy investment products with it. You can buy individual stock, or you can buy mutual funds. A mutual fund, everybody, is like a collection of stocks. Like maybe you want, you could get a high risk mutual fund. You could get a mutual fund there's a collection of companies that are in sustainable industries or in the developing world. There's infinite menu of hedge funds. Mutual funds, right? There's all these different products. So, and then the point she also makes, in addition to people living longer, the government has, these pensions are gone, and governments have reduced appetite for social insurance and pension provision. They're not going to be there. They want to reduce their footprint in that part of your life. This means that individual families, you and your parents, you're all on your own increasingly. Let me tell you how my situation is at MICA. So here I go sharing again. MICA doesn't have a pension for me. That's just the way it is. You won't find many employers with a pension anymore. That's just the name of the game now. They encourage me to get a retirement account, and they contribute to it, right? So I put a certain amount and they will match it. And that's how a lot of employers work now, because they want to encourage you to save the money. And then they put me, as an academic, I work with a company called TIAA-CREF. I don't know what that stands for. You can look them up. They're huge. They manage the retirement funds for educators. They're a very big outfit because there's a lot of educators in this country, right? College and high school. And then they offer a variety of products. Last time I met with my agent at TIgraph, he's like, we have a new real estate fund. Would you like to put your retirement funds in there? We have treasury bonds. We have this stock. We have that stock, or different mutual funds, different. What is your appetite for risk, right? You can do the whole thing and just rearrange it all the time. And it can be fun sometimes, but I'm not much of a gambler. But I just want you to understand the reason this is so, one of the reasons it's so important is because everybody in America has skin in the game. And increasingly worldwide. This is a worldwide phenomenon. Everybody has skin in the game, and this is one of the reasons the financial industry is booming. Okay. The other reason I wanted you to read this is because I want you to understand the power of finance industry, and I wanted you to become familiar with some of these terms you've probably heard of. I don't know. Did anybody watch The Big Short over the weekend? I told you to watch it. Watch it if you can. It's actually very interesting and very helpful. But asset management, this is a big thing. This is the big growth in the financial industry. The government basically handed the financial service industry a silver platter and said, here, you can have every American who needs a retirement fund. And, these Americans, they're heavy consumers. They need a lot of dough when they retire. Oh, and by the way, they live to be 85 now, right? So they're going to need a lot of cash. So I'm sending them your way. They'll invest money like crazy. By the way, I looked it up, everybody. Social Security, your Social Security that is taken out of your check is not invested in the stock market. There was a proposal to do that by George W. Bush 15 years ago, and everybody freaked out and said, no way, don't you dare. And the reason they said that is because the feeling was that it would not be secure. Social Security, your Social Security is entirely invested in what are called treasury bills, which are U.S. bonds, basically. And a treasury bill is another term for U.S. debt. You're basically buying United States debt, right? So when Biden wants to spend money on various programs, we sell our bonds around the globe. U.S. bonds are a very popular investment product because the United States is a very reliable country and pays a good return on it. And so the U.S. government is basically taking your Social Security with that money, lent it to itself. That's basically what's going on here. But anyway, asset management is a huge that is a very important emphasis now of the finance industry. It has grown in huge importance because people rely on stocks to fund their long-term retirements, in addition to just supplement their basic income. Right? It's become hugely important that you do this. It's a requirement, if you will. And as she points out, that the people that we're giving our money to, these outfits, they have an increased appetite for risk. And why is that? That's because the risky bets have the biggest potential payoff, right? And the banks, they drift into these riskier investments to squeeze out and to grow profits. Okay, just a few more minutes and then we can break for the day. So the financial sector has absolutely exploded in recent decades, right? Here's something that I noticed. This is the top of page 143. That top paragraph says, in the US, assets under management, that is dollars being invested in the stock market. In the US, assets under management grew from 3.1 billion in 1951 to 17 trillion in 2015. So from 3 billion to 17 trillion. Math is not my strong suit. I can't even begin to tell you what percentage growth that is. Get on your computers, do that yourself, your calculators. All I can tell you is that's a shitload. That's gigantic, right? There was another quote on page 155 where she's quoting this guy Bogle, who was an important investment manager. He points out when in the middle of his quote on 155, when I came into this field 60 years ago, stock trading volumes averaged 2 million shares a day. In recent years, we've traded 8.5 billion shares of stock daily. So this industry has exploded. And it exerts, it sells itself as a model of economic growth and success and productivity. And the financial sector, as we'll see, also exerts outsized political influence. So the financial sector has exploded, and it has done that in the process, has created a variety of financial instruments that are designed to make money. Various kinds of loans and investment products for these hungry investors. And thanks to the growth in this sector, she argues that value creation has been confused with value extraction, because that's how these guys work. These funds, as we'll see, they tend to enrich themselves and they extract value from things that in the long run, over the economy of a whole, she says, the financial sector has worsened inequality. And when inequality gets worse, productivity goes down. The econ. So that's where her argument ties up neatly, which is this industry sells itself on value, but it is quite the opposite. It's actually a deeply unproductive force. And just to make that point, I'm going to hit on one or two things, and then we can break. Among these various investment products that have been sold, around page 144, she talks about these things called hedge funds. I'm not going to get much into them right now, partly because I don't really understand them. They're very complicated, but I would just point out that they involve a lot of risk, and they involve a lot of what is called leverage. Leverage means debt. They borrow a ton of money and they could lose, but they've also make outsized gains once in a while. George Soros, you probably heard of George Soros. She mentions him. He's one of the most famous hedge fund directors. He has made mint from his fund. The one that I wanted to talk about briefly is what is called private equity. And I'm just going to talk about this very briefly because I know we're out of time here, but this kind of illustrates what's unproductive here. Private equity, a private equity firm. I'm going to give you an example. She mentions Bain Investment. Am I heard of Bain? Anybody know who was the head of Bain? I know that sounds like that name just sounds evil, doesn't it? Of course,
villain.
Yeah, I think of The Simpsons, McBain. I'll tell you who's the head of Bain. Mitt fucking Romney. He was the head of Bain after he was governor of Massachusetts, before he ran for president and before he became senator of Utah. This guy can't make up his mind. In the late 2000s, he was the president of Bain. So private equity firms, they are kind of a model of the destructive she talks about. A private equity firm is owned by a couple individuals, high net worth. It's a group of people. They put a firm together, and you can invest in that firm. What they do is they buy a company. This was the story at the beginning where she talks about in England about this private equity firm bought a company. They buy a firm in order to, what they say, make it more efficient. But in the process, what they really do is they extract value. Okay. As we discussed previously, in financial terms, when you make a company more efficient, what do? One of the best things you can do to make it efficient is to lay off people. You trim your workforce. So what these private equity firms tend to do is they buy a firm, they may shut down certain things, They may certain aspects of the company they buy. They may lay off plenty. They often transfer debt. She makes a big deal about this. They often transfer their own debt to the debt of a company. I wish I could buy a company and transfer my fucking debt. I have so much debt, mortgage, credit card, car debt. If I could be like a private equity firm and buy someone and say, here's my debt, and then they sell off that firm once they have really pulled it apart. This model of capitalism is the problem, she says. Some people are enriched from this, but everybody else is impoverished because they have basically they basically chewed up this company and spit it out in the process of extracting value. And that helps a few, but it certainly doesn't help the many. Okay. And I just going to recall when I showed you the pie chart of Harvard, their endowment, they invest a lot of money in private equity funds and hedge funds. Now, I don't know what I'm going to find out with Micah. I'm very curious. I found out that when I was researching for class today, I found out TIA CREF, my investment fund for my retirement, they invest in hedge funds and private equity firms too. I don't have my retirement personal, before anybody here gets outraged at me, I don't believe I've allocated any of my retirement in any of that crap. But just letting you know, this is very common, and this spells very troubling trends for capitalism more broadly. So I think I'm going to have to stop there today, guys, because of the time. I want to let you go and do other things. But consider that an appetizer. Okay, that's a first start. And then next week we'll take a deeper dive into Mazzucato. We have to discuss what she calls the financialization of the rest of the economy. You may have noticed how she opened the next chapter pointing out that Ford Motor Company makes more money from car loans than selling cars. What the hell is that all about, right? That's exactly the problem she's talking about. And we're going to have to take on Milton Friedman, which is a very important idea for her because she argues that Friedman is behind his theory of the corporation and the fact that a corporation exists for the profit of the shareholders. He says this is the theory that's behind it all. This is the theory that's problematic. That's really inspired this. We need to retrench. And she says we also need to reappraise the value of public investment, in order to reorient ourselves towards what is truly productive in an economy. Okay. So that's it for today, y'all. Great, super discussion. I enjoyed it greatly. I'm going to stop there and I will stick around if anybody needs to chat with me. Okay.
Bye.
All right.
See you
Have
later.
a great week.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.